We're in the middle of working on our form right now. We just finished up our employee form reducer. We have not yet wired up to our combined reducers call, so let's do that now before we forget. This is something I just forget to do all the time personally, so I want to make sure I catch this one. So here's my reducers index.js file. I've got my combined reducers call in here. Right now we've only got the auth reducer. So we are going to also import our employee form reducer from employee form reducer. And then we need to decide on what piece of state, what do we want to call this new piece of state? I think that I'm just going to call it employee form. Keep it nice and simple. So the employee form piece of state will be maintained by the employee form reducer. I'm not super happy, I'm kind of going on a bad spree of naming things here. I'm not super happy with the name employee form reducer because it really assumes that there's only ever going to be one employee form in our entire application. So, not super happy about it, but I think that given the scope of this application, I think it's going to work out. In addition, I think that it's a reasonable pick because the form and the reducer itself are very tightly coupled. So the name does really imply, hey, this is working along with a employee form, which is hosted in employee create. Now that our reducer is hooked up, we can flip back to our employee create form and start wiring up our action creators. So here's my employee create component. At the top, we need to, let me first say, we need to wire up an action creator here. So whenever someone adds something or types something on an input, we can call our action creator and update our form piece of state. So remember how we get access to an action creator in a component. We have to import the connect helper and import the action creator that we want to call as well. So at the top, we'll import connect from React Redux, and then we'll import employee update from actions. Then at the bottom, we will add on our connect tag. So here's the bottom. We do not yet have a map state to props. So for the first argument, I'll pass null. And the second argument, we'll pass in our employee update action creator. And then don't forget that second set of parens to go around employee create as well. And I think I spoke too early. We actually are going to have a map state to props. We have to make sure that we get those attributes that are being created by the form itself. So we will make a map state to props function to pull stuff off of the employee form piece of state. So we'll say const map state to props. Here's my state object. And then just as we did previously with our auth piece of state, we'll do a little bit of destructuring ahead of time and just make sure this code in here looks nice and clean. So I expect to have a name, a phone, and a shift. Now, of course, again, we do not yet have the shift in here, but we will very shortly. So we'll just carry the shift through for right now. So we'll say this is coming from state.employee form. Remember, I know I say this all the time, but it's a very important piece of Redux. We have the employee form piece of state right here because we assigned our employee form reducer to the employee form key in our combined reducers call. That is why it's called employee form. Finally, we'll return the name, the phone, and the shift. Cool. I think there's probably just one more step. I think we just have to make sure that we pass these values or these name and phone onto the respective inputs. So let's do that right now. I'll make sure that my input knows that its value is going to come from this.props.name, and the phone's value is going to come from this.props.phone. Whew. One last thing. I know there's a lot of type in here, but I gotta point out the fact that we, in the past on the login form, we spent probably 6 or 7 sections to go through what we're doing now in 2 rather quickly. So we're definitely speeding up here pretty heftily. The last thing we have to do is make sure that whenever an input's value is changed, we call our employee update action creator. That's the last thing we have to do. So on both the name and the phone, we'll add in on change text. I'm going to get myself some space here. And I'm going to put the action, or excuse me, the callback right here just inline on onChangeText rather than making a separate helper function up here. So onChangeText, whenever this thing is called, it will be called with the new text that's in that input. We need to call this.props.employeeUpdate. And remember the signature of this action creator. What does it expect to be called with? Let's go back over to our employee actions file. Here's employee update. It expects to be called with an object with a prop key and a value key. So we need to make sure we follow that method signature. So whenever this thing gets called, we want to make sure that it has a prop of name and a value of text, like so. Okay, this part in here, this keeping track of the prop thing, is what's going to allow us to use just one single action creator rather than having, on name update, on phone update, on shift update, one action creator for each attribute. Instead, we can just use a single one. Then we'll repeat the same process for the phone input as well. So we'll say on change text. Take the text, employee update. The prop that we're changing this time is going to be the phone, and the value is going to be text as well, because that's what we're going to call our callback function here with. It's going to be text. One thing to keep in mind is that unless we are using destructuring from the arguments object, remember destructuring is where we put in the curly braces in the arguments list. If there's just a single argument here, we can call this whatever we want. It doesn't have to be text. It can be name in this case. It can be phone here. It can be anything we want. I'm just choosing to stick with text. Maybe a more reasonable approach would be if we made it value, and then we can use a little bit of ES6 shorthand to condense the line down to just be value, like so. Because if the name of the key and the value are the same, we can condense it down to just a single word. So maybe that's a valuable refactor. Let's go with that direction and shorten up each line just a little bit. Okay, I think this is good. I think that this is probably a great time to do a little bit of testing. My linter is complaining that I defined map state to props without ever adding it to anywhere. So my mistake, we defined this, but we never added it to the connect function. I'm going to replace the null down here with map state to props, like so. All right, now we're ready for some testing. I'll refresh the simulator. I want to remind you when we log in here that due to that oddity with how Firebase handles errors, if there's any error in your code during the sign-in process, it's going to be caught during that Firebase promise, remember? And you will see that error pop up in the console right here, but it might manifest itself by saying authentication error, making you think that you typed in the wrong password, but in reality, it is the promise swallowing the error. So don't forget that if you get an error right now, or if it says authentication failed or something. Hopefully mine works. Okay, cool. So I've got my employee list. I'm going to attempt to add an employee. And I want it to be Jane, 555, 555, whatever. And then if I want to, we can click create and add the record in here as well. Of course, we don't have anything hooked up to the button just yet, so let's continue in the next section and finish working on our form.